Greetings all you terrific texturing pundits. Quick one today on how to adapt textures to be used for large-scale landscapes.
But why?
Well, here's what it looks like if you scale down even a perfectly seamless tileable texture on a large-scale landscape. You start seeing quite a bit of repetition, even for the most seamless texture. Major problem for most people making landscapes. So it's a quick fix you can do in After Effects or just about any image editing software. What you need is 2 or more textures for the same type of surface in your landscape. What we're going to do with these textures is to match their colors, scale them down, and patch them together to form one mega seamless texture. Alright, we're in After Effects, got my bare minimum of textures, and I'm going to be making a rocky surface. First thing to do is to drag them all into the same composition. And let's match the colors. I'll move the top one slightly off to the side so we can see them side by side. And I'm going to match the bottom texture, which is this slightly more yellow one, to the more grey top texture here. And I'm going to use a classic hue saturation to match those colors. All I need to do is reduce the saturation of that one and maybe tweak the hue so it's a bit more red, which the one to the left seems to be. I'm also going to chuck an exposure on top of that, just to bring that up a few notches. Now sometimes if it's hard to see if the colors match exactly, it helps to zoom out, because it kind of abstracts both the images. And you're able to see if they match a bit better. But I think that looks probably good enough. Now the next step is to scale them both down, and match those scales in the process. And I'm going to do that with an effect called Motion Tile. Because that effect lets us scale them down and tile the edges without eating all of our RAM. Now to keep both of these seamless, we need to set the width and height to a number that's the result of 100 divided by a whole integer. So for example, 100 divided by 4. I'm going to set that for both width and height. That means that the texture is going to repeat 4 times perfectly in both directions. I'm going to add a motion tile to the other texture and do the same, but that one looks like it has a slightly bigger scale, so I'm going to divide that by 5. So we're going to get 20% on the height and width there, so it repeats 5 times. And now we can start seeing that repetition error again, because we can quite clearly see some of these brighter rocks being repeated multiple times. Fear not though, because we are going to make quick work of that. Let's center both our textures again and create a new layer. Make that comp size and add a fractal noise on that. And then we find ourselves a nice noise type that we think looks good. I quite like the turbulent smooth set to a spline. Gives a nice random and slightly rocky looking layout. I'm going to transform and scale that up just a little bit. Then I'm going to duplicate that fractal noise on top of itself. Going to transform on that one and scale it well down, because this one I'm going to use just to add more detail to the first fractal noise. I'm also going to go down to evolution options and crank up the random seed just so it's a completely different layout. And then scroll all the way down and set the opacity to about 50%. So that's just adding a little bit of detail on top of the first fractal noise. Finally, let's top our effect stack off with a little levels adjustment on that. And we really want to crush these colors, because as you might have correctly guessed, we are going to use this as a luma matte, controlling how our textures blend in the final super texture. Alright, I think that looks plenty crushed. Now I can set this top texture to use that new layer as a luma matte. And we can immediately see that we're getting a much nicer and more seamless repetition. If we compare with and without that luma matte, we can tell that it makes a massive difference. But it's still not quite perfect, so you might want to go in and tweak these levels a little bit more, controlling how much or how little of one or the other texture is being used. Also controlling just how sharp the blend is between the two. But of course, the best way to do it would be to just keep adding more textures on top to add even more randomness into the mix. I'm going to do almost that. I'll duplicate this bottom texture, put it right on the top, rotate it 90 degrees in either direction, duplicate the matte, and set our top texture now to use that same mat. And just go in on the evolution options for both these fractal noises and randomize the heck out of both of them. And suddenly it's much less visibly repeating. Now it's still seamless, but it's much more large scale because we've scaled down the textures, and it's not visibly repeating, at least to the same extent. You can keep adding textures and duplicating them, modifying them, flipping here and there. Just remember to do that with all of the texture maps that you're going to use. So your displacement map, your specular, and your roughness as well. And let's compare before and afters. Here's what it would have looked like if we just scaled one texture, quite repetitive. Now this is what that same landscape looks like using this mega texture mixing technique. Next time we're going to be looking at creating low-res to high-res displacement maps using already existing elevation maps. But until that time, thank you for your time and stay in motion. If you like these tutorials, the best way to support them is to tell every freelancer you know about the Process of Motion course. It's going to help them with every aspect of the business, creative, and management side of the freelance life. The link to the course is in the description.